headlines. Well, joining me now for her first interview about all this is the journalist at the centre of the COVID WhatsApp leak sensation, TalkTV's international editor, Isabel Oakeshott, along with TalkTV's political editor, Kate McCann, Daily Mirror associate editor, Kevin Maguire. Isabel, wow. When it dropped last night, 10:45, it was quite something to read all this, particularly for people like me who obviously were on air throughout this pandemic and involved in pretty heated discussions with people like Matt Hancock, in which, frankly, they lied through their back teeth about what was really going on. To see in their WhatsApp messages the cold, hard reality was shocking. You've had this for a while. What made you, let's be brutally honest about what you did. You did a book with Matt Hancock. As part of the preparation for the book, he gives you 100,000 WhatsApp messages between him and members of the cabinet and the Prime Minister. You don't put them in the book. He says you signed an NDA to stop you using these, and you've now presumably broken the NDA, given these to the Daily Telegraph for publication. He says you've stolen them. Blah, blah, blah. What is your reaction to all this?
Well, first of all, Piers, I'm very aware of how robustly you fought for public accountability from our politicians during this period. I can tell you that your name does crop up in some of these messages.
I would hope so.
I'm sure we'll come to that later in the week. Look, you mentioned in your introduction the absolute farce that is the public inquiry arrangement so far. This public inquiry, if you look at the terms of reference, I could spend a year on each one of about the 30 things that they have been asked to consider. The judge, who is somebody of the highest integrity and has a great reputation, no doubt will want to do justice to every one of those things. She's not been given a deadline. So the reality is that this inquiry, which I think is absolutely critical, will likely not come up with any conclusions left to the government's own devices, perhaps for at least a decade or more. Now, we could have another pandemic next month, next year. Who knows when the next one is coming? We cannot afford to wait for a decade or more for answers as to what was really going on. So this resource that I had is an extraordinary way to quickly get to the truth of what really happened, why crucial decisions were made that affected millions of lives, that millions of people are still paying the price for today, without us having to be fobbed off with an inquiry which I'm afraid is most likely going to end up, for the best intentions of everyone involved, being a whitewash.
So Lord Bethell, who was a health minister at the time, has told Tom Newton-Dunn for his show tonight on TalkTV, Isabel Oakeshott has no idea what went on in those rooms. She hasn't seen the papers. She's just seen a few WhatsApps from around the edges. She's fooling herself if she thinks that's really given her an insight. What she's taken is a bunch of fluff that was in transient, I think that means, WhatsApp messages, and pretended that it's substantive insight into the evidence-based decision that's been made. It's simply not true. It's a confection, and quite frankly, the Telegraph should be ashamed of themselves.
I mean, what an embarrassing and pathetic and lame defence from Lord Bethell there. I imagine Lord Bethell's rather nervous because he is one of the most indiscreet people in these WhatsApp messages, highly revelatory. For him to dismiss them as a few WhatsApp messages, which I heard him say this morning, the entire volume of this is almost 3 times the size of the Bible. It's not a few messages. And the reality is that the WhatsApp groups were used routinely, minute by minute, to communicate critical decisions.
And by the way, there is an argument they should be public record, right? I mean, in America, every communication like this with the Prime Minister, with the President, would be public record. So you can't do private messaging.
Let me add that if he's saying that this is a partial account, I am all ears for the rest of it, and I'm sure that the nation would be very grateful if all the WhatsApps from every minister involved were released now.
Your position is that this is in the public interest.
100%.
But let me just ask you, to the specifics which Hancock has said by way of response, did you sign an NDA which pledged not to use these messages?
Yes.
So you've deliberately broken that?
I have, in the public interest.
And there could be legal consequences for you.
I think the public interest is overwhelming. Whenever you break a big story which is in the national interest, and I've done a few of them, it can be a rocky road, it can be a bumpy ride. Look, I know that I'm going to get a few knocks over this. I'm prepared to do this because I think that the national interest is so utterly compelling.
Another difficult question. The cynic would say, well, hang on, you've just done this memoir with this guy, which has enriched him, right? And in the memoir, you say that he's very persuasive and, you know, you thought he had good arguments and so on. Not a sign now of what you're now saying about it. And a cynic would say, well, come on, Isabel, you did this memoir with him. Why weren't you more honest? If you really felt this way, why not just pull away from writing the book with him and expose all this at the time, rather than allow this sham of a book to come out?
No, it wasn't a sham.
Well, he glossed over everything and made him out to be some kind of hero.
I think that's quite unfair. I don't know whether you've read every word.
I couldn't get through all of it.
Well, even though it was so beautifully written by me.
Actually, judging by the sales figures, nor did most people.
I'm really happy.
But my point being that...
I'm really happy to address that question.
Yeah, go on then.
Because I think it is an important one. And the reality is I would, of course, not have put my name to anything that I thought was an untruth. The other reality is that there are nearly 3 million words in these WhatsApp messages. I was working on this book against the clock. It was a phenomenal effort. It was twice the length of any normal political book. It was simply impossible to go through every line of those WhatsApp messages. And of course, equally, the book is Matt Hancock's diary. It's his truth.
When did he know that you'd done this?
Late last night.
Wow, when everybody else did?
Yeah.
Did you have any compulsion at all about frying a contact like this, someone you've written a book with?
I'm not going to sit here and disparage Matt Hancock personally, because this is not about. Well,
you have just tortured him.
For me, this is not about.
No, but Isabel, come on, look.
This is not about Matt Hancock.
You have, as a journalist, you've written a book with this guy, and within months of the book coming out, you've tortured him, right? I mean, you've fried the contact, you've ripped up the NDA, you've published all the messages. I'm not taking a judgment. I'm just saying you have done that.
There are many things I could sit here and say about Matt Hancock, which I'm not going to do.
Now it seems a good time to me.
I'm not going to do, because this, for me, is not a personal thing.
Is it true that he went back on his word with you in relation to your business arrangement with the book?
I don't want to get into that. He certainly undertook to do an interview with TalkTV, which was very important to me as international editor of TalkTV. He reneged on that. It's, of course, not the reason why I did this. I cannot emphasise enough, this is not personal against Matt Hancock. I can see many good qualities in him. We had a good working relationship, by and large. Various aspects towards the end were not quite...
Have you heard from him since the publication of this?
Yes, I have.
What did he say?
I received a somewhat menacing message at 1:20 in the morning.
Saying?
I'm not going to repeat what was in the message, but yeah.
You say menacing, what was...
Well, I think you can easily surmise whether Matt Hancock is my friend at this point.
Well, I'm sure he's not, but I mean, what does menacing mean? He threatened you?
I think that he is extremely troubled in terms of how to respond to this, and I don't blame him, but this is not about him as far as I'm concerned. It is much bigger than that. It is about getting the truth of what really happened.
I understand that. Specifically, he says it's been edited, that there were other WhatsApp exchanges about a subsequent meeting.
I think you'll find he's withdrawn that. No, it isn't. It's emphatically inaccurate. We specifically refer to that meeting. I think it's on page 4 of the coverage. He simply hasn't read the inside story.
So is there any doubt from everything you've read, is there any doubt at all that the veracity of that main charge in the Telegraph revelations today about the care homes and about him overriding the advice from the chief medical officer, that is entirely true?
There's no doubt in my mind that what the Telegraph have printed today is an accurate reflection. The Telegraph has been exceptionally careful not to selectively quote from these messages. Look, they're not daft. They know that that would be a very easy stick to beat them with. So they have been very careful. Also, the Telegraph doesn't overclaim for any of this. Of course, we know there are other people whose conversations we don't have access to. That is entirely obvious.
OK. You two have been sitting here listening to all this. I mean, look, from a journalistic point of view, I picked up the Telegraph this morning. It was a sensation. I mean, this was extraordinary reading to go through all this. I think I've put the tough questions to Isabel, and she's been robust in responding. From a political point of view first, Kate, what has been the reaction to this, and what are the likely consequences, if anything?
So there have been a couple of different reactions. Clearly, Matt Hancock and his team very, very frustrated and unhappy. Helen Whately, you know, a minister who was sort of talking about this today, suggests that there was a meeting in between all of this advice being, given to Matt Hancock, where the political reality came up against the scientific advice. And I think this has been the problem all the way through this story. In fact, all the way through COVID. There is a difference between scientific advice and the reality of what can happen on the ground. And Matt Hancock's point would be, yes, Chris Whitty advised we do this. The capacity wasn't there to do it. Therefore, we were forced to scale it back, and we did it as soon as we could. What I actually think is that some of the messages in here do reveal something quite problematic for the government, which is about the way that care homes were not prioritised. Helen Whately's messages inside the Telegraph showing her saying, we have a problem with PPE, we don't have enough, and I can't get anyone to tell me when I will have enough. And she's asking, quite nicely of the Health Secretary.
I mean, I interviewed Helen Whately several times in that period, and I thought she was completely out of her depth, which I thought summarised my view of that government. A young rookie government, just come in, a lot of them completely out of their depth, didn't know what they were doing.
But then did you change your mind when you read this? Because I actually
think
I
had slightly more sympathy with her that she had clearly been asking for this stuff, but clearly wasn't getting it back. I mean, Kevin, first of all, from a journalistic point of view, what do you think about what Isabel did here?
Isabel's accused of stabbing Hancock in the back, and she'll have to deal with the journalistic ethics.
But is there a public interest defence for that?
But yes, clearly. And are we in a better position tonight than we were last night on COVID? Yes, we are.
That's what I think.
Because she's made them public. She'll have to take the knocks as well as the praise for that. But we get an incredible insight into what was really happening.
What do you feel you know now you didn't yesterday?
That Hancock didn't follow always the scientific advice. Yeah. Yes, he was guided by it at times, and you can accept, right, COVID appears almost from a clear blue sky. It's a huge catastrophe, a real challenge. You're making decisions in real time with resource limitations, you haven't got the organisation right. So mistakes will be made. But because of some of those mistakes, people died. They died. I mean, we can't get away from that.
And by the way, in care homes, thousands and thousands of people died. I know people who lost their relatives, who lost their mother, their father in care homes.
And Piers, I can see this is very inconvenient for Matt Hancock because he wants to reinvent himself as a lad larking around on reality TV, no doubt doing a lot of gigs, at dinners and so on, and getting paid. Well, people aren't going to be laughing now.
Well, they're not.
When they realise.
One person who definitely won't be laughing is the owner of Crabtree Care Homes, David Crabtree. David, we've spoken many times throughout the pandemic and again in the last few months. What is your reaction to these revelations about Matt Hancock in particular in the Telegraph?
If you go back, thank you, Piers. If you go back, and thank you for being a stalwart for the care sector, thank you. If you go back to your opening section where he was speaking, he said from the very start, well, from the very start, he lied. And he lied, and he lied, and he continues to lie. It's not that we got things wrong. Pandemic was new to everyone. It's that he lied after the event and continues to lie. And what happens with his lies and all of this publicity is he reinvokes all the anger and upset, the loss of life, the relatives. He risked, it wasn't just the elderly, he was risking the mother of two that was coming to work at 7 o'clock with no PPE. Everything this man does is characterised by an inadequate sociopath. Everything he does, if you look it up, there's his characteristic. I wish to goodness he would just disappear because he's managed to destroy his own career, his relationships. I cannot tell you how incensed the care sector is every time this man's name is mentioned.
Yeah. No, I know. I've heard it from them myself. Okay, lots of people's names are in these WhatsApp messages. Yeah. Boris Johnson's there liberally. Rishi Sunak, we're told, is in a lot of them too. Isabel, you can confirm that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the current Prime Minister is, they must all be on tenterhooks, right? Waiting for the next instalment tonight. We've already revelations this afternoon that apparently we only follow, for example, what Scotland did in relation to kids wearing masks and stuff because they didn't want to, make a problem with Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland, which seems to me an extraordinary revelation. Never mind anything else.
Yeah, I think it is. And actually, it's a point, you raise a point that's going to be a much bigger issue for Westminster now, and it's going to have huge repercussions. Today, at the lobby briefing for journalists after Prime Minister's questions, the questions were repeatedly about how do ministers use their phones? Are they using deletion on WhatsApp as a regular thing? You said that they should be held to account, that those messages should be public record. They are, Piers, they are public record, except from who is checking that that happens right now? And the Prime Minister's spokesman was asked that today, and he said, well, there is a policy on this. You are actually, as a minister, if you are discussing policy, you're allowed to do that on WhatsApp, but you have to then ensure that it is recorded so that any official decision which is not allowed to be made on WhatsApp but can be discussed is then there as public record. At the moment, I'm not sure that the government can guarantee comfortably that that is happening.
I'm sure they can't. Isabel, are there revelations to come which could cause the current Prime Minister problems?
I think that the current Prime Minister, in his capacity as Chancellor, was doing what Chancellors should do and protecting the public purse.
Nothing damaging about him?
I don't want to comment on what's to come up. I'm sure you'll understand that. But I think that this issue that you raise about the use of WhatsApps goes to the heart of why it's so important for people to see the way decisions were made, the casualness, the informality of, you know, a few mates in incredibly powerful positions with a thumbs up or thumbs down deciding the fate of millions of people.
Look, you can, under certain circumstances, get them under a freedom of information request, but it's worth saying Lord Bethell, the health minister at the time, who's had to go at Isabel can stick up for herself, he lost a lot of his WhatsApp messages on COVID contracts when he was transferring phones. It wasn't quite Wagatha Christie, the phone going over the side of a boat, but nevertheless, those messages have been lost forever. So when he has a go at other people, I think, hang on, Bethel, some of your messages have gone already. No, it's government by WhatsApp now. Tony Blair used to be by sofa. It's shifted.
Is everyone, Kate, in Westminster basically waiting for the Telegraph to drop tonight?
Yeah, I think people are, and they will be probably for some time. But I do think that this goes beyond, as we're saying here, it's beyond Matt Hancock. It's about how policy is made in this country. And I think it's about the fact that a lot of these decisions, when you read them, you may not look at them and think, wowza, there's the smoking gun. But actually, it's more subtle than that. It's about the way that these decisions were made.
Listen, I just remember the certainty that Hancock was saying we put a protective ring around care homes. Yeah. He did not put a protective ring around care homes. He let a lot of people back from hospital without testing them, where hospitals were rife with COVID. He let anyone from the community come and go, including the carers, including family members to start with, and so on. The whole thing was total chaos.
And that was the point your guest was making, which was seemingly, and I don't know whether he believes this, I don't want to speak for him, but if actually the government had been honest and said, we can't do this yet, we would love to, we're going to try as soon as we can.
Well, let's ask David Crabtree that very question. David, had you known these issues that the government and we're now reading about, you would have presumably acted differently.
You don't need to be a scientist to know that you don't admit potentially infected people into a care home when Professor Valence in January said these would be breeding grounds, and we watched it across Italy and France before it arrived at our doorstep. We already knew to shut the door, to try and minimise. We accepted that this was, you know, there was a pandemic on and nobody had any PPE or whatever. We did the best we could, and we accept that errors were made. What is the anger is invoked because they now lie to cover it up. We would have coped as we would cope with diarrhoea and sickness, with flu epidemic, with all the others that we normally associate through winter. We're not stupid. We've been doing it a long time. We don't need a scientist. What we do need is truth. Factual, we don't have enough, this is what we're going to do, we're going to try and help you. Don't lie to us and say that you put a ring of protection around us.
David, how many people did you lose in the pandemic from COVID?
We lost 18 over 2 homes. That's just us. But across Bradford, we lost thousands.
Absolutely shocking. It was shocking. David, thank you for your passion. You're always...
And the relatives couldn't go in. Yeah. Nobody could see anybody. So people were losing their loved ones without seeing them. It was awful.
I know a good friend of mine who had to say goodbye to her beloved mother on FaceTime in a care home when it ripped through the care home. I mean, imagine that. I still haunts me to this day thinking about it. David, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Thank you, Isabel.
If we could just get an apology off Mr. Hancock, that would do us.
You know what? I think you've got more chance, honestly, of him handing back the money from eating kangaroo testicles in the jungle. But a good idea, David. Isabel, I think it's a fantastic scoop. There's an argument to be had about whether it's all in the public interest. I think it's overwhelming in the public interest. And so I'm looking forward to reading more revelations.
Thank you.
So I think congratulations are in order to you for exposing this, frankly. Kate, thank you very much for joining me. That's going to be interesting to see the reaction tomorrow as more revelations come out tonight. And Kevin, you're staying with me.
Thank you.
You've got the short straw. Are you two in mourning, by the way, in the black for Hancock's career? Or?
Yeah, accidental.
Good to see you.